Hi, this is Tom from Nightingale Games talking about War Room. This is the third video in the series of opening moves and strategies overview. We've talked about Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis powers so far. And now we're moving on to the Allied forces. And we're going to talk about the Soviet Union, which, as we see before us, they are primarily concerned with the Germans here on the Eastern Front, and there is currently a pact in place, a sort of treaty of non-aggression between the Japanese and the Soviets. If one side breaks, then they take 6 stress, which will surely push them up the track, but it might be worth it for either side. So they start the game with a few land forces over on the eastern side. You can see there's a factory in Khabarovsky. They don't have any naval forces other than this cruiser and submarine off the Archangel in A4. And those usually come down and help defend Great Britain, but they might go off and do interesting things. You can see they have a few air units. They only start with 1 bomber unit in Moscow, and as mentioned before, they can usually zig high, zig low, or zig middle. Using their rail network, they might just rush these forces along the tracks up to the front. The Caucasus is often a juicy target for the Germans because it has 2 oil. And there's no armor in the stack to start with. So oftentimes there's a move to the south to defend because the Ukraine is a central point for the Germans to move onward. They're fairly evenly matched all along the front, so it's anyone's game. A lot depends on what the Great Britain does elsewhere, if they decide to focus on Asia. And a lot depends on Italy, whether they support Germany in their attack on the Eastern Front, or if Italy tries to do its own thing in the Mediterranean, or if Germany diverts forces to the Mediterranean. So a lot could happen, and a lot is also outguessing what the enemy does. So you can see there's quite a lot of infantry in each of these stacks, as there was historically. But there's also quite a lot of vulnerability, but it's spread out for they have a number of industries right on the line here. So there's not any one central industry, but rather several spread out, which is advantageous for the Russians and the Soviets. You'll notice that some are redder. The final is this dark color. These are an earlier prototype version plastic. Not a lot usually happens with these low value territories, but if the pact is broken, sometimes there's movement this way through China to battle Japan, or sometimes they have to come down and defend the Axis moving up this way through the Middle East. So sometimes that can happen. Since Turkey is neutral, that's a bit of a blocking point. Turkey starts with a significant defensive force of 6 infantry, 2 artillery, and 1 fighter. And so whereas that could be a channel into Germany and Italy, it's typically not. That's a bold move to invade Turkey. Likewise, up north, the neutrals are rarely invaded throughout the game, but oftentimes Norway is a frequent target in the early game. You can see that there is a port in Leningrad, so they could start building ships and face off against these, or they could even send air units to take out these cruisers. Once they get a foothold in here, you can see that Belarus and the Ukraine were originally controlled by the Soviets. That's why they have this borderline here. So if the British, for example, liberate the Ukraine, it will revert control to the Soviets rather than the British placing a marker there. Well, the Soviets are one of the not as complicated as the British, and but they are immediately in the thick of it, as opposed to the U.S., which take a while to move their forces to the battlefronts. So they do have a number of difficult choices to make to outthink the Germans. That's it for this video. The next video will be the British.